3 words. That's all it took to turn a quiet WNBA offseason into a full-blown pressure cooker. Run it back. Not a press conference, not an interview, not even a quote pulled out of context. Just 3 words dropped under an Instagram post. And suddenly, the Indiana Fever's entire offseason strategy was exposed to the public. Because when Caitlin Clark says something that simple, that directly, it's never accidental, and it's definitely not small talk. At first glance, it looked harmless. Sophie Cunningham posts a throwback highlight reel from the 2025 season. A little nostalgia, a little remember when? Fans smiling, scrolling, moving on. But then Caitlin Clark shows up in the comments. No emojis, no inside joke, no soft landing, just a clean, unmistakable message. Run it back. And in that moment, what should have been a routine off-season memory turned into the most loaded social media exchange the league has seen in years. Because context is everything. Clark didn't say this in private. She didn't text it. She didn't whisper it behind closed doors to management. She posted it where everyone could see it. Fans, media, rival teams, and most importantly, the Indiana Fever front office. That's not coincidence. That's leverage. When the face of the league speaks publicly, she's not asking for permission. She's setting the tone and daring the organization to respond. And Sophie Cunningham didn't brush it off. She fired back immediately. Cuddles and dinner twice a week when we reunite. Playful on the surface, sure, but underneath that humor was confirmation. This wasn't a one-sided sentiment. This wasn't fans projecting meaning where there was none. This was 2 players openly signaling that what they built together mattered and that they expected it to continue. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about memories, it was about the future. What made this moment explode wasn't emotion, it was timing. The league is on the edge of chaos. Expansion is coming. Portland and Toronto are waiting. The CBA negotiations have frozen everything in place, but once that deal unlocks, front offices will have days, not weeks, to finalize protection lists that could define franchises for years. Every move will be scrutinized. Every omission will tell a story. And right before that pressure hits, Caitlin Clark plants her flag in public. That's why this comment landed like a warning shot, because Clark doesn't operate impulsively. She's calculated. She understands optics, she understands power, and she understands that in the modern WNBA, silence can be just as loud as a statement, which makes speaking up even louder. Run it back wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't fandom, it was a message delivered in plain language with no room for misinterpretation. Now the Fever are trapped in a spotlight they didn't ask for, but can't escape. Protect Sophie Cunningham and risk losing someone else to expansion. Leave her exposed and send a very clear message to your franchise player that her voice carries limits. This isn't just a basketball decision anymore. It's a test of alignment, trust, and awareness in a league that's changing faster than some front offices can keep up with. And the most uncomfortable part? Everyone is watching. Fans, media, expansion teams looking for identity. This one comment cracked open a conversation Indiana hoped would stay behind closed doors. And what happens next won't just shape a roster, it will reveal whether the Fever understand the league they're actually playing in now, or if they're about to learn the hard way. Caitlin Clark doesn't post casually. That's the first thing people miss when they try to downplay that comment. This isn't a player who floods social media with reactions, inside jokes, or off-the-cuff thoughts. Every public move she makes is measured because she knows exactly how much weight her words carry. When someone like that chooses to say something publicly, especially in just 3 words, it's never accidental, it's intentional by design. If this were just friendly banter, it would have looked different. There would have been emojis, laughter, something to soften the message. Instead, Run It Back landed clean and direct, no cushioning, no ambiguity. That's not how you talk when you're reminiscing. That's how you talk when you're stating a preference you expect to be taken seriously. And in this case, the audience wasn't just Sophie Cunningham, it was the entire organization watching from the sidelines. The public nature of it matters more than the words themselves. Caitlin could have picked up the phone, she could have sent a text, she could have said this behind closed doors, where these conversations usually live, but she didn't. She said it where fans could screenshot it, where media accounts could amplify it, and where rival teams could quietly take notes. That choice alone tells you this wasn't about friendship, it was about framing the conversation before Indiana had a chance to control it. Timing makes it even louder. This didn't happen mid-season when emotions run high. It didn't happen after a tough loss or a playoff exit. It happened in the dead space of the offseason, right before the league's most chaotic moment hits. Expansion drafts don't reward hesitation, they punish indecision. And Clark knows that once the CBA clears, front offices will be forced to move fast. By speaking now, she made sure her stance was already on the record before those decisions start flying. There's also a subtle power shift embedded in that comment. Clark isn't just the Fever's best player, she's the engine behind their relevance, their ratings, and their national attention. When someone with that level of influence makes a request publicly, it changes the dynamics inside the building. Suddenly, ignoring it isn't neutral, it becomes a statement. Either you're aligned with your franchise star, or you're willing to risk the perception that you're not listening.
And that's why calling it a joke misses the point entirely. Jokes disappear. This didn't. It lingered. It spread. It forced conversations that Indiana would have preferred to delay. Clark didn't demand anything outright, but she didn't need to. The simplicity of the message did the work for her. 3 words were enough to draw a line, and now the Fever have to decide whether they're willing to cross it. The reason this moment feels so tense is because the league is standing on a trap door that hasn't opened yet. Expansion is coming, and no front office is truly ready for what that means. On paper, it sounds manageable. New teams enter the league, existing teams protect a small group of players, and the rest become available. In reality, it's controlled chaos, the kind that exposes every weak spot in roster construction and every hesitation in leadership. Once the CBA negotiations finally clear, everything unlocks at once. Free agency, contract structures, protection lists, and teams won't have the luxury of time to think through every scenario. They'll have days, not weeks, to decide which players define their future and which ones they're willing to gamble with. That pressure is exactly why Clark's comment landed when it did, because the decisions Indiana is about to make won't just be strategic, they'll be rushed, reactive, and irreversible. The expansion rules are brutal by design. Each team can only protect a handful of players, likely 5 or 6 at most. That's it. No special exceptions, no sentimental safeguards. Everyone else becomes fair game for Portland and Toronto. 2 franchises entering the league with a clean slate and a clear mission. Steal proven value from teams that can't protect everyone. Expansion teams don't build patiently, they pounce on mistakes. That's what makes this so dangerous for Indiana. Their roster isn't top-heavy with disposable pieces. It's layered with players who all matter for different reasons. Scorers, defenders, glue players, culture carriers. When protection slots are this limited, the margin for error disappears. Every name you protect says something. Every name you leave exposed says something louder. And Portland and Toronto aren't just filling jerseys, they're building identities. They need players fans recognize instantly. Players who bring toughness, personality, and credibility on day one. They need faces that sell tickets, spark debates, and make people care before the first tip-off. That means they're not just scanning box scores, they're looking for influence, presence, and narrative power. That's why this expansion draft feels different. It's not just about talent redistribution, it's about opportunistic teams circling organizations that hesitate. One miscalculation, one "we'll figure it out later" decision, and you lose someone who becomes the foundation of another franchise overnight. And the worst part? You don't get a do-over. Once a player is taken, the story is written. Indiana knows this. Every front office in the league knows this, which is why Clark speaking up before the lists are even finalized adds another layer of pressure. She didn't wait for the chaos to begin. She spoke while the clock was still ticking down, forcing Indiana to consider not just who they can afford to lose, but who they absolutely cannot afford to let walk when expansion teams come calling. On paper, Sophie Cunningham is the easiest name for skeptics to circle. She's not the leading scorer. She's not the player dropping 30 on a nightly basis or padding highlight reels with flashy numbers. If you're building a protection list strictly off stat sheets and long-term projections, she's the kind of player analytics departments convince themselves they can replace. And that's exactly why cutting her loose feels deceptively logical and dangerously wrong. Because what Cunningham brings doesn't show up cleanly in a box score. Her value lives in the moments that don't get replayed in slow motion, the possessions that turn ugly, the games that get chippy, the nights when opponents decide that making Caitlin Clark uncomfortable is part of the game plan. That's where Sophie shows up. She was the buffer, the first one in, the player willing to absorb contact, talk back, and make it clear that Clark wasn't going to be isolated or targeted without consequence. That role matters more than people admit, especially for a generational star in her first seasons under an unforgiving spotlight. You don't just ask any rotation player to take on that responsibility. It requires trust, awareness, and a willingness to play a thankless role so someone else can shine. Cunningham didn't hesitate, she embraced it. And that kind of commitment isn't something you find in a late-round draft pick or a short-term free agent deal.
There's also the leadership aspect that gets overlooked because it's harder to quantify. Cunningham brings an edge that stabilizes the locker room. She sets a tone. When things start to spiral, she's the one who pushes back. That presence allows younger players and stars alike to focus on their jobs instead of managing chaos. Take that away, and suddenly everyone has to carry a little more emotional weight on the floor. The irony is that this is exactly what makes her the risky cut. Teams convince themselves that leadership and toughness are interchangeable, that culture can be rebuilt quickly, that chemistry naturally resets, but history says otherwise. Once you remove a player who anchors that dynamic, the ripple effects are immediate. Defensive intensity slips, communication breaks down, small moments snowball into bigger problems. Indiana saw this firsthand throughout the season. They didn't just win games, they developed an identity, and Sophie was a major part of that. She gave Clark room to breathe, she gave the team an edge, she gave opponents something to think about. Those aren't luxuries, they're foundations, and leaving someone like that unprotected isn't just a roster decision, it's a gamble that you can recreate something that took an entire season to build. Even if you ignore everything Sophie Cunningham does between the lines, her off-court impact alone forces Indiana to pause. This isn't a player who exists quietly on the end of the bench. She carries a platform that reaches far beyond the WNBA bubble, and that visibility has real value in a league that's still fighting for attention, relevance, and cultural momentum. Teams don't just compete on the court anymore. They compete in narratives, engagement, and reach, and Sophie is a rare player who moves all three at once. Cunningham became one of the most searched female athletes in the country during the league's recent surge, not just within basketball, but across sports. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when personality, timing, and visibility collide. She's hosting a major podcast. She's showing up on national sports shows. She's going viral for her takes, her confidence, and her presence. Every time she speaks, she pulls new eyes toward the team she represents, and during this stretch, that team was Indiana. That matters more than some front offices want to admit. The Fever didn't just benefit from Caitlin Clark's arrival, they benefited from the ecosystem that formed around her. Sophie was a huge part of that. She helped turn Indiana into a conversation, not just a box score. When fans tuned in, they weren't just watching for threes and assists, they were watching personalities interact, chemistry unfold, and storylines develop in real time. That's the modern WNBA, whether traditionalists like it or not. What makes this dynamic even more powerful is that Cunningham chose to build her platform alongside Clark. She didn't drift into her own orbit, she aligned herself with the face of the league. That partnership amplified both of them, and by extension, amplified Indiana. It created something bigger than either player individually. When that happens, you're no longer talking about replaceable parts. You're talking about a brand ecosystem that's hard to reconstruct once it's broken. And that's why this decision is so dangerous if Indiana treats it like a simple numbers game. Losing Sophie wouldn't just subtract a defender from the rotation, it would fracture a public-facing identity that fans have already invested in emotionally. You can't spreadsheet your way out of that loss. You can't issue a press release and expect people to move on. In a league driven by visibility and connection, off-court power isn't a bonus anymore. It's part of the foundation, and Sophie Cunningham holds a piece of it that Indiana can't afford to ignore. When Caitlin Clark said, "Run it back," she wasn't talking about nostalgia. She wasn't replaying memories or clinging to comfort. She was defining what winning actually looks like to her in this league. And that distinction matters, because Clark isn't just chasing numbers or headlines. She's trying to survive, thrive, and lead in an environment that has already proven how unforgiving it can be to generational stars. What Clark was really endorsing was a structure, a system of trust, a group of people she knows she can rely on when the noise gets overwhelming and the game turns physical. Sophie Cunningham represents that stability. She represents protection, emotional safety, and competitive balance. Clark knows what it feels like to be the focal point of every scouting report, every hard closeout, every unnecessary bump. Wanting Sophie back isn't about friendship, it's about maintaining a functional environment where excellence is sustainable. This is where people underestimate Clark's awareness. She understands how quickly team culture can unravel. She's seen how fragile chemistry is once it's disrupted. That's why her comment wasn't vague. It wasn't phrased as hope or nostalgia. It was direct. She wasn't asking management to consider something. She was telling them what has already been proven to work. And she did it publicly because she wanted that standard on record. There's also an element of leadership embedded in the message. Clark is stepping into her role as the voice of the franchise, whether Indiana is ready for that or not. Leaders don't just talk about their own performance, they talk about the pieces that make success possible. By openly backing Cunningham, Clark was signaling what she values in a teammate: toughness, loyalty, and the willingness to handle the messier parts of the game.
And that's why this moment feels so pivotal. Clark didn't issue an ultimatum. She didn't threaten. She didn't create drama. She simply made her priorities visible. Now the pressure isn't on her, it's on Indiana. If they ignore that signal, they're not just making a basketball decision. They're choosing to downplay the voice of the player they've built their future around. And in this league, at this moment, that choice speaks louder than any comment ever could. If Indiana gets this wrong, the damage won't show up all at once. It won't be a single headline or one bad loss you can point to and say, that's where it fell apart. It will unfold slowly, and that's what makes it so dangerous. The first crack appears the moment Sophie Cunningham is left unprotected, and an expansion team doesn't hesitate. Portland or Toronto steps in, and just like that, a player Indiana treated as expendable becomes the foundation of someone else's future. For an expansion franchise, Sophie isn't just a roster addition, she's a ready-made identity. She brings toughness, recognition, and a personality fans can latch onto immediately. She gives a brand new team credibility before they've even played a game. That's gold for a new market. And if she's wearing a new jersey, smiling in introductory press conferences, hosting her podcast from a different city, the contrast will be impossible to ignore. Indiana didn't just lose a role player, they handed over momentum. The narrative shift would be brutal. This wouldn't be framed as Sophie moved on. It would be framed as Indiana let her go. Fans would remember the comment. They'd remember Clark saying she wanted to run it back. They'd remember the chemistry, the protection, the moments when Sophie stepped in so Clark didn't have to. And every time Cunningham makes a big play or goes viral on her new team, that decision gets replayed in people's minds. What makes this even more volatile is Sophie's voice. She's not disappearing quietly. She has a microphone, literally and figuratively. Through podcasts and national appearances, she has the ability to shape how the story is told. Not in a bitter way, not in a dramatic way, just by telling the truth as she experienced it. That Indiana had a chance to keep the core together, that the chemistry was real, that Clark wanted her there. Once that version of events circulates, no front office spin can fully contain it. Inside the organization, the ripple effects go deeper. Ignoring Clark's public endorsement doesn't just strain one relationship, it changes how players view management. It plants the idea that input from the locker room has limits, that trust, once questioned, doesn't reset easily.
It seeps into future contract talks, into how players speak about the organization when cameras are on, into whether free agents see Indiana as a place where stars feel supported. And then there's the long game. Every decision after this gets viewed through the same lens. Was this move about winning or about control? Was chemistry valued or dismissed as sentimental? Indiana doesn't just lose Sophie Cunningham. They risk defining themselves as an organization that missed the moment when the league changed. And in a WNBA driven by connection, visibility, and trust, that kind of misstep lingers far longer than any single season. What's really happening here goes far beyond Indiana and one protection list. This moment is a snapshot of a larger power shift that the WNBA is still adjusting to in real time. The league isn't being driven solely by front offices and quiet negotiations anymore. It's being shaped by star players who understand their influence, their platforms, and the way public perception now moves just as fast as transactions. For years, roster decisions lived in back rooms. Fans found out after the fact, and players were expected to accept whatever direction management chose. That balance has changed. Today's WNBA stars aren't just athletes, they're brands, broadcasters, and cultural drivers. When someone like Caitlin Clark speaks publicly, she's not just sharing an opinion, she's shaping the conversation before executives ever step in front of a microphone. That's why Clark's comment feels different than similar moments from the past. She didn't criticize, she didn't complain, she didn't stir chaos. She simply expressed alignment with a teammate, and by doing so, reframed the decision Indiana is about to make. The power isn't coming from confrontation, it's coming from visibility. Once fans see what a star values, every move the front office makes gets measured against that standard. This is the new reality of the league. Chemistry matters because fans see it. Loyalty matters because audiences invest emotionally. Players who connect on and off the court become storylines people follow, not just names on a roster. Expansion teams understand this better than anyone, which is why they're hunting for players who bring identity, not just production. And established teams that ignore this shift do so at their own risk.
Indiana's situation is becoming a case study, not because they're uniquely reckless, but because they're caught at the intersection of old logic and new influence. The old model says you protect assets based on age, upside, and numbers. The new model asks a different question. Who holds the room together? Who amplifies your star? And who fans believe in? Clark's comment forced that question into the open. And this won't be the last time it happens. As the league grows, stars will continue to assert their voices earlier, more publicly, and more strategically. The teams that thrive will be the ones that listen without feeling threatened. The ones that struggle will be the ones that treat player influence as noise instead of signal. What Indiana does next won't just define their roster, it will show whether they understand the power dynamics of the WNBA as it exists right now, not the version they wish they were still playing in. When the dust settles, this decision won't be remembered for who made the protection list and who didn't. It will be remembered for what it revealed about Indiana as an organization. This is one of those moments that quietly defines a franchise long before the results show up in the standings. Not because Sophie Cunningham is the best player on the roster, but because how you handle a moment like this tells everyone what you value when the pressure is real. Indiana isn't just choosing between players, they're choosing between philosophies. Do they believe team building is strictly about future projections and controllable assets? Or do they understand that in today's WNBA, chemistry, trust, and public alignment matter just as much as raw production? Caitlin Clark didn't ask for special treatment, she made her priorities visible. What happens next shows whether that visibility carries weight or stops at the comment section. This is also a test of awareness. The league has changed. Fans aren't passive anymore. They track storylines, they remember moments, they connect dots. If Indiana leaves Sophie unprotected, there won't be confusion about how it happened. The trail is already there. The comment, the chemistry, the silence or action that follows. That context will follow the Fever long after the expansion draft is over. There's still time to get this right, but not much.
Once the CBA clears, decisions will move fast and explanations will come after. That's when intentions become actions and actions become identity. Protecting Sophie would signal that Indiana understands the moment they're in. Letting her walk would suggest they're still operating on old assumptions in a league that no longer rewards them. In the end, this isn't about sentimentality or fear, it's about alignment. It's about whether the Fever see Caitlin Clark as talent to manage or a partner in building something sustainable. Because when a generational player speaks this clearly, listening isn't a favor, it's a choice. And that choice will echo far beyond one off-season.